landed at Valparaiso, and gave notice of the proceedings of Benavides, and in consequence Sir Thomas Hardy directed Captain Hall to proceed to Arauca with the convoy to set the captives free if possible. It was for the accomplishment of this service that Captain Hall sailed from Valparaiso, and he called at Conception on his way, in order to glean information respecting the pirate. Here the captain ascertained that Benavides was between two considerable bodies of Chilean force, on the Chilean side of the Biobio, and one of those bodies between him and the river. Having to wait 2 days at Conception for information, Captain Hall occupied them in observing the place. The country he describes as green and fertile, and having none of the dry and desert character of the environs of Valparaiso. Abundance of vegetables, wood, and also coals are found on the shores of the bay. On the 12th of October the captain heard of the defeat of Benavides, and his flight, alone, across the Biobio into the Araucan country, and also that 2 of the Americans whom he had taken with him had made their escape, and were on board the Chacabuco. As these were the only persons who could give Captain Hall information respecting the prisoners of whom he was in quest, he set out in search of the vessel, and after 2 days' search found her at anchor near the island of Mocha. From thence he learned that the captain of the Ocean, with several English and American seamen, had been left at Arauca, when Benavides went on his expedition, and he sailed for that place immediately. He was too late, however. The Chilean forces had already made a successful attack, and the Indians had fled, setting fire to the town and the ships. The Indians, who were in league with the Chileans, were every way as wild as those who arrayed themselves under Benavides. Captain Hall, upon his return to Conception, though dissuaded from it by the governor, visited the Indian encampment. When the captain and his associates entered the courtyard, they observed a party seated on the ground, round a great tub of wine, who hailed their entrance with loud shouts, or rather yells, and boisterously demanded their business, to all appearance very little pleased with the interruption. The interpreter became alarmed, and wished them to retire, but this the captain thought imprudent, as each man had his long spear close at hand, resting against the eaves of the house. Had they attempted to escape, they must have been taken, or possibly sacrificed, by these drunken savages. As their best chance seemed to lie in treating them without any show of distrust, they advanced to the circle with a good-humoured confidence, which appeased them considerably. One of the party rose and embraced them in the Indian fashion, which they had learned from the gentlemen who had been prisoners with Benavides. After the ceremony they roared out to them to sit down on the ground, and with the most boisterous hospitality insisted on their drinking with them, a request which they cheerfully complied with. Their anger soon vanished, and was succeeded by mirth and satisfaction, which speedily became as outrageous as their displeasure had been at first. Seizing a favourable opportunity, Captain Hall stated his wish to have an interview with their chief, upon which a message was sent to him, but he did not think fit to show himself for a considerable time, during which they remained with the party round the tub, who continued swilling their wine like so many hogs. Their heads soon became affected, and their obstreperous mirth increasing every minute, the situation of the strangers became by no means agreeable. At length Peneleo's door opened, and the chief made his appearance. He did not condescend, however, to cross the threshold, but leaned against the doorpost to prevent falling, being by some degrees more drunk than any of his people. A more finished picture of a savage cannot be conceived. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man, with a prodigiously large head, and a square-shaped, bloated face, from which peeped out 2 very small eyes, partly hid by an immense superfluity of black, coarse, oily straight hair, covering his cheeks, hanging over his shoulders, and rendering his head somewhat the shape and size of a beehive. Over his shoulders was thrown a poncho of coarse blanket stuff. He received them very gruffly, and appeared irritated and sulky at having been disturbed. He was still more offended when he learned that they wished to see his captive. They in vain endeavoured to explain their real views, but he grunted out his answer in a tone and manner which showed them plainly that he neither did nor wished to understand them. Whilst in conversation with Peneleo, they stole an occasional glance at his apartment. By the side of the fire burning in the middle of the floor was seated a young Indian woman, with long black hair reaching to the ground. This, they conceived, could be no other than one of the unfortunate persons they were in search of, and they were somewhat disappointed to observe that the lady was neither in tears nor apparently very miserable. They therefore came away impressed with the unsentimental idea that the amiable Peneleo had already made some impression on her young heart. Two Indians, who were not so drunk as the rest, followed them to the outside of the court, and told them that several foreigners had been taken by the Chileans in the battle near Chilean, and were now safe. The interpreter hinted to them that this was probably invented by these cunning people on hearing their questions in the court, but he advised them, as a matter of policy, to give them each a piece of money, and to get away as far as they could. Captain Hall returned to Conception on the 23rd of October, reached Valparaiso on the 26th, and in 2 weeks thereafter the men of whom he was in search made their appearance. The bloody career of Benavides now drew near to a close. The defeat on the Chilean side of the Biobio and the burning of Aruca with the loss of his vessels he never recovered. At length, in the end of December 1821, discovering the miserable state to which he was reduced, he entreated the Intendant of Conception that he might be received on giving himself up along with his partisans. This generous chief accepted his offer, and informed the supreme government, but in the meantime Benavides embarked in a launch at the mouth of the river Lebo and fled, with the intention of joining a division of the enemy's army, which he supposed to be at some one of the ports on the south coast of Peru. It was indeed absurd to expect any good faith from such an intriguer, for in his letters at this time he offered his services to Chile and promised fidelity, while his real intention was still to follow the enemy. He finally left the unhappy province of Conception, the theatre of so many miserable scenes, overwhelmed with the misery which he had caused, without ever recollecting that it was in that province that he had first drawn his breath. His despair in the boat made his conduct insupportable to those who accompanied him, and they rejoiced when they were obliged to put into the harbour of Topocalma in search of water of which they had run short. He was now arrested by some patriotic individuals. From the notorious nature of his crimes alone, even the most impartial stranger would have condemned him to the last punishment, but the supreme government wished to hear what he had to say for himself, and ordered him to be tried according to the laws. It appearing on his trial that he had placed himself beyond the laws of society, such punishment was awarded him as any one of his crimes deserved. As a pirate he merited death, and as a destroyer of whole towns it became necessary to put him to death in such a manner as might satisfy outraged humanity, and terrify others who should dare to imitate him. In pursuance of the sentence passed upon him, he was dragged from the prison in a pannier tied to the tail of a mule, and was hanged in the great square. His head and hands were afterwards cut off, in order to their being placed upon high poles, to point out the places of his horrid crimes, Santa Juana, Tarpalanca, and Aruca. End of chapter 11.